The richest man in Kansas was about to lose everything, and he didn't even know it yet. Clay Mercer rode through a graveyard of cottonwoods on the coldest morning of his life, hunting down a piece of land nobody wanted, and what he found behind that broken fence would burn his name into the history of Cimarron County forever. A widow with a revolver, a creek worth killing for, and men who'd already decided she had to die before spring. Stay with me until the very end of this story, and please drop a like and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The wind off the Kansas plains had a way of finding every crack in a man's coat, and Clay Mercer had stopped trying to keep it out years ago. He let it come, let it sting his eyes and crust ice on his beard, and remind him, every mile of every ride, that the land did not care who owned the deed. The land took what it wanted. That morning, the sky over Cimarron County was the color of cheap pewter, low and bruised, threatening snow that hadn't quite committed to falling. The grass was dead. The creeks were running thin under skins of ice. His big bay gelding, Marston, blew steam from both nostrils and pulled at the bit like he wanted to go home, and Clay didn't blame him one bit. But Clay didn't turn back. He never turned back when there was a question still itching at him, and there was a question now. A piece of land on the north edge of his holdings, 60 acres maybe, tucked behind a windrow of dead cottonwoods so thick you could ride past 3 times and not see what was on the other side. He'd been hearing things in town, pieces of things. A widow up there, alone, speculators sniffing around. A name nobody could quite remember, and a deed nobody could quite produce. Clay didn't like questions he couldn't answer. He turned Marston off the cattle trail and pushed him through the bones of the cottonwoods. What he came out into stopped him cold. The fence on the south side of the place was leaning so far it was practically lying down. The posts rotted at the base and the wire sagging like an old woman's wash line. The barn had a hole in the roof big enough to throw a horse through. One of the side walls had given up entirely and was held in place by nothing but a stack of hay bales and prayer. The house itself was a low sod and board thing, the kind a man and a wife built together their first year and meant to replace and never did. And yet, the yard was swept. Not just walked on, swept. Clay could see the lines where a broom had passed that morning, fresh enough that the wind hadn't filled them in yet. The path from the door to the well had been edged with stones, set neat. The chicken coop on the east side had a new patch of board on it, raw pine still pale against the weathered gray, fixed by somebody who knew what they were doing and had nothing fancier to fix it with. And there, on the lee side of the house, behind a windbreak of stacked sod blocks, was a winter garden. A garden. In Kansas. In January. Clay sat his horse and stared at it. Frostbitten kale, dark and curly, rows of something that might have been turnip greens hunched against the cold. A patch of garlic shoots, thin as a child's fingers, pushing up through dirt that had no business letting anything live. Somebody had built a low wall of fieldstones around it to hold the heat. Somebody had laid old burlap over the rows at night, then peeled it back at dawn. He could see the burlap now, folded and stacked under the eave of the house. Somebody, on this dying piece of nothing, was still fighting. He had just put a gloved hand on the saddle horn to dismount when the door of the house opened and a woman stepped out with a rifle pointed at his chest. "That's far enough," she said. "State your business or ride." She wasn't tall. He'd say that later, the few times he could be made to talk about that morning. She wasn't tall, and she wasn't built heavy, and her hair was the color of dark honey, pulled back so hard it must have hurt. She had on a man's wool coat 3 sizes too big and boots that had been resoled at least twice. The rifle, though, the rifle she held like she'd been born with it. The muzzle didn't waver. Her finger sat outside the trigger guard, the way a person who actually knew about guns held a gun. Clay raised both hands slow. "Name's Mercer, Clay Mercer. I own the spread south of here." "I know who you are." "Then you know I'm not here to harm you." "I don't know any such thing." He almost smiled, caught himself. A smile from him, in his beard, in this light, would look like he was showing his teeth. "May I get down, ma'am?" "You may not." "Ma'am, my horse has been—" "Your horse can wait. Talk." He let his hands stay up. The cold was working its way into his fingers, and he was getting tired of holding them in the air, but he had a feeling that if he lowered them an inch before she said so, this conversation was going to end in a way nobody wanted. I was riding the north line of my property, he said. Heard there was a place up here, wanted to see it for myself. Why? Curiosity. Try again. He breathed out. The breath came out white. All right. I heard there were speculators in town asking after this section. I wanted to see what they were after. The rifle dipped, maybe a half inch, not down, just shifted like she was easing the weight in her arms. Speculators, she said. 2 men. One of them's name is Grady, Silas Grady. You know him? I know the name. Then you know what I came to see. She looked at him a long time. The wind made the dead cottonwoods clack against each other behind him, a dry, rattling sound like old bones. Somewhere out beyond the broken barn, a crow called, 3 notes, falling. Get down, she said finally. Tie your horse on the lee side of the barn where the wind won't get at him. There's an old trough with water, not frozen all the way through. Then you come around to the kitchen door, not the front. I won't have strangers tracking through my house. Yes, ma'am. And Mr. Mercer. Ma'am. This rifle stays loaded. I would expect nothing less. He swung down. His knees gave a small traitorous protest, but he didn't let it show. 43 years old and most of them spent in the saddle, and his body had started keeping its own ledger, totaling up the cost in ways he tried not to read. He led Marston around to the barn, found the trough, broke the inch of skim ice with the butt of his quirt. The big bay drank long and quiet. Clay loosened the cinch a notch and patted the gelding on the neck. Stay friendly, he said. Don't make her shoot me. He came around to the kitchen door. It opened before he could knock. She had set the rifle in the corner by the door, but not so far she couldn't reach it in a step. The kitchen was small and clean in a way that took work. There was a cast iron stove with a kettle on it, hissing, a scrubbed pine table with 2 chairs, a cup with chicory, and what smelled like real coffee mixed half and half. The floor was wood plank, scarred and old, but it had been swept that morning too. The whole place smelled of wood smoke and the bitter green of the garden outside. Coat off, hat off, boots stay on, but you wipe them at the door. Yes, ma'am. He did as he was told. Hung the heavy sheepskin coat on a peg already worn shiny by use. Set his hat crown down on the table because he'd been raised right, and a hat brim down was bad luck, and his mother had cuffed him for it more than once. She watched him do all of this without comment. When he was done, she pointed at one of the chairs. Sit. He sat. She poured him a tin cup of the coffee chicory and set it in front of him with no ceremony at all. Then she sat down across from him, her back to the stove, her own cup in her hand. Evelyn Hart, she said. This was my father's place, his father's before him, and I am not selling it. I didn't ask to buy it. Not yet. Mrs. Hart, Miss Hart. He paused. You're not married? I was. 3 years. He's dead. I'm sorry. Don't be. He was a decent man and he died of a fever that came on him in the night. There's nothing to be sorry about except that he's gone. She said it the way a person says a thing they've said to themselves so many times, the words have gone smooth as a creek stone. Clay knew that kind of saying. He'd done it himself. Miss Hart, he started again, I want to be plain with you. I came up here because I heard Silas Grady was sniffing around your land. I don't know you. I owe you nothing. But I know Grady, and I know what he does. What does he do, Mr. Mercer? He waits for a place to fall apart, and then he buys it for nothing. And if it won't fall apart fast enough, he helps it along. Helps it along how? Fences come down in the night. Cattle disappear. Wells go bad. A fire in a barn. He took a sip of the coffee. It was strong enough to skin paint, and he liked it. And then he comes around with a contract and a smile. She was quiet for a long minute. The kettle on the stove rattled its lid. He came around in November, she said, offered me $4 an acre. Land's worth 12. I told him to leave. And he left? He left. He said he'd be back in the spring. He won't wait that long. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. Her eyes were the color of strong tea, brown with something gold in them, and they did not blink. What do you want, Mr. Mercer? He set the cup down, lined it up careful with a knot in the wood. I want to make you an offer, he said, and before you go for that rifle, let me finish. Talk fast then. Your south fence is down. Your barn's going to come apart in the next big wind. You've got a creek on the east side of this property that runs year-round, and I happen to know it's the only piece of running water for 6 miles in any direction. My herd's been crossing onto BLM land to drink, and the federal man's getting tired of it. I need water for my cattle in the dry months. You need fence and barn and a back that isn't broken by spring. Get to it. I'll fix your fences. All of them. I'll put a new roof on your barn and shore the wall. I'll put 2 of my men on it for as long as it takes. In exchange, my herd gets seasonal access to your creek, May through August. Not your house, not your garden, not your good pasture. The creek and a path to it, 60 feet wide along the east boundary. And I file a partnership of convenience at the county seat that puts my name on the water rights alongside yours. Grady can't touch the creek without dealing with me, and he won't deal with me. She set her cup down very slowly. You want to put your name on my deed. On the water rights, not the deed. The land stays yours, every acre. Why would I trust that? Because if you don't, you'll lose it all by April. And because I'll sign whatever paper you want me to sign. Bring your own lawyer if you have one. Bring 2. I can't afford a lawyer. Then I'll pay for one. Your choice of man. He works for you, not me. She was looking at him with an expression he could not read. It wasn't gratitude. He had been ready for gratitude and had been ready to be uncomfortable with it. It wasn't gratitude, it was something flatter and harder. Calculation. Why? She said. Why what? Why are you doing this? A man like you. Don't tell me it's about the creek. You've got money enough to dig 100 wells. Tell me why. He took his time. He had not, in fact, asked himself that question on the ride up. He had felt the question coming and had ridden faster to outrun it. I rode in here, he said slowly, and I saw a fence down and a barn falling apart, and I figured I knew what I was going to find inside this house. A woman ready to give up, maybe drinking, maybe sick, maybe just tired enough she'd take any offer put in front of her. Then I saw the garden. The garden? Nobody who's given up plants a garden in January, Miss Hart. Nobody who's given up sweeps her yard. She did not look away. She did not soften. But something moved at the corner of her mouth, the smallest tightening, like a person pulling a stitch. That's not an answer. It's the closest one I've got. The silence stretched. The kettle hissed. Outside somewhere, the crow called again. I'll think on it, she said. How long? As long as I want. Grady, as long as I want, Mr. Mercer. He nodded once, picked up his cup and drank the rest of the coffee in 2 swallows. Stood, picked up his hat, pulled on the heavy coat. At the door he paused. There's one more thing. There always is. The men I'd send up here, Tom Riley, and a boy named Hutch. Tom is 42, married, 2 daughters. Hutch is 19 and dumb as a fence post, but honest. They'll do what you tell them. If either of them gives you so much as a sideways look you don't like, you ride down to my place and tell me. I will handle it. I can handle it myself. I have no doubt of that, ma'am. I'm just telling you the chain of command. She almost smiled. He saw it try and die. Goodbye, Mr. Mercer. Miss Hart. He went out into the wind. She watched him from the kitchen window until he was past the cottonwoods. Then she watched the cottonwoods for another 10 minutes, in case he turned around. Then she sat down at the table and put her face in her hands and did not cry, because she had stopped crying in October and she was not going to start again now. Evelyn Hart was 31 years old. She had buried a husband at 28 and a father at 29 and a baby at 25 who had not lived to see her first sunrise. She had $372 hidden in a tin in the rafters of the kitchen, and that was every cent she had in the world. She had 6 chickens, 2 of them too old to lay. She had a milk cow named Patience, who was bred to a neighbor's bull last summer and was due in March. She had 2 horses, a sorrel mare named June, and an old gelding named Mister, who was going blind in the left eye. She had 11 head of cattle, mostly thin, on a pasture that should have carried 30. She had a creek. She had not, until 2 months ago, understood what the creek was. Then Silas Grady had come riding up the lane in a buggy, too fine for this country, with 2 men on horseback behind him, and he had stood in her yard with his hat in his hand and his smile on his face and told her she was sitting on the most valuable piece of land in 3 counties. He had said the words right of way and spur line and the railroad will come, ma'am. The railroad always comes. He had offered her $4 an acre and told her she should be grateful. She had not been grateful. She had told him to leave. He had said he would come back in the spring. She had spent the next 60 days waiting for fire. Her father's revolver was in the bottom drawer of the bureau in the bedroom. It was a Colt Navy, cap, and ball, 40 years old. It had been carried in the war and in the years after, and in the dry, mean decade of the 80s when the cattle barons fought the homesteaders, and most of the homesteaders lost. Her father had killed 2 men with it and never told her which 2 or why. He had taught her to load it and clean it and shoot it when she was 11 years old. He had told her there was no shame in a woman knowing how to defend her ground. She thought, sitting at the kitchen table in the wake of Clay Mercer's leaving, about taking the revolver out of the drawer and putting it where she could reach it. She thought about the man's face, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the way he had taken his hat off without being asked and set it crown down on the table, the way he had said her father's place, not your place, your father's, as if he knew there was a difference. She thought about Silas Grady and his $4 an acre. She got up and went into the bedroom and took the revolver out of the bureau and brought it back to the kitchen and laid it on the shelf above the stove where the warmth would keep the powder dry. Then she put on her coat and went out to check the garden. 2 days later, Clay Mercer came back. He brought Tom Riley and the boy Hutch and a wagon loaded with cedar posts, a roll of new wire, a coil of rope, a barrel of nails, 2 saws, 3 hammers, and a side of bacon. He climbed down from the wagon and walked to the kitchen door and knocked. She opened it. "I haven't said yes," she said. "I know." "Then why are you here?" "Because you haven't said no, and the south fence isn't going to fix itself, and I would rather start the work and have you stop me than wait and have you lose the place because I was being polite." She looked past him at the wagon. At Tom Riley, a square-built man with a sad mustache and kind eyes, who tipped his hat to her without quite looking at her face. At the boy Hutch, who looked about as smart as a sack of doorknobs and was grinning at her chicken coop like it was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. "You brought a side of bacon," she said, "for the men. I'm not asking you to feed them. I'll feed them. I'm not having grown men working on my land and eating cold biscuits out of a saddlebag." "Yes, ma'am." "And I'm paying you back for the bacon." "Yes, ma'am." "Stop saying yes, ma'am, Mr. Mercer." "I'll try." She stepped aside and let them in. Bam. The first day they fixed the south fence. The second day they started on the barn wall. The third day Clay did not come. But Tom Riley and the boy were there at dawn, and they worked until the light went, and Evelyn fed them ham and beans and cornbread and listened to Tom talk about his daughters, 8 and 10, and the way the older one was learning to read out of a primer her mother had brought from Missouri. The boy Hutch did not talk. He ate 3 helpings and went red in the ears when she refilled his plate. The fourth day Clay came back. He brought a young man with him, thin and neat in a town coat, with spectacles and a leather case. "This is Mr. Pendergast," Clay said. "He's a lawyer out of Topeka. He works for you, not me. He drew up the partnership of convenience we talked about, and he brought it for you to look at. If you don't like it, you tear it up and I pay him anyway. Are we clear?" "We're clear." "He'll go through every word with you. Take your time. I'll be in the barn." He left. The young lawyer sat down at the kitchen table and opened his case and laid out 3 pages of dense handwriting and looked at her over his spectacles in a way that was, she realized after a moment, not unfriendly. "Mr. Mercer gave me specific instructions, ma'am," he said. "He told me that if there is any clause in this document that you do not understand or do not like, I am to change it or remove it. He told me that the land is yours and stays yours, and that anything in this agreement that contradicts that is to be struck out. He told me, in his exact words, that if the contract favors him in any way, I have failed to do my job." She stared at the lawyer. "Read it to me," she said. He read it to her. Took 2 hours. She stopped him 11 times. She made him strike 1 whole paragraph. She made him rewrite a clause about livestock losses. She made him add a sentence at the end that said the agreement could be ended by either party with 60 days' notice and no cause given, and the lawyer wrote it down without complaint, and then he read the whole thing back to her 1 more time. "That'll do," she said. "Ma'am, I'd like to say something if I may." "Go ahead." "In 4 years of practice, I have never drawn a contract for a man with money that took less from a person with none. Mr. Mercer is a hard man and an unsentimental one, but this document is honest. I would not have come up here to read it to you otherwise. Thank you, Mr. Pendergast. You are welcome, ma'am. She signed it. He signed it as witness. They went out into the yard where Clay was holding a brace board steady for Tom Riley to nail. He saw them coming. He set the board down and walked over, wiping his hands on his trousers. It's signed, she said. Good. I want to be clear about something, Mr. Mercer. All right. You haven't bought my gratitude. You've bought my fence and my creek and a fair price for both. If a day comes when you forget that, I will end this agreement and you will ride off my property and we will not speak again. Are we clear? Crystal. Good. She held out her hand. He looked at it for a second like he wasn't sure what it was for. Then he took it. His glove was rough leather and his grip was hard and brief and exactly as long as it needed to be. Behind them, the boy Hutch dropped a hammer on his foot and let out a yelp. And Tom Riley laughed, and the lawyer Pendergast smiled into his collar, and somewhere out past the dead cottonwoods, a crow called 3 notes, falling. That night, after the men had gone, Evelyn sat by the stove with the signed papers in her lap and read them through one more time by the yellow light of a kerosene lamp. When she was done, she folded them and put them in the tin in the rafters with her $372. Then she took down the revolver from the shelf above the stove and cleaned it. The barrel was clean already, but she cleaned it again. She loaded 6 chambers. Her father had taught her never to carry one under the hammer, but her father had not had Silas Grady coming back in the spring. She loaded 6. She put the revolver under her pillow, the way her father had carried his in the bad years. Then she blew out the lamp and lay down in her clothes because the wind was getting up outside, and the temperature was dropping, and the stove would need feeding before dawn. She did not sleep for a long time. She lay in the dark and listened to the wind in the dead cottonwoods, and she thought about Clay Mercer's face when she had asked him why, and the way he had said nobody who's given up plants a garden in January, and she thought about her father, dead 3 years, who had taught her how to load a Colt Navy and how to read a deed and how to know when a man was lying. Her father had said, Evie, when a man comes to your door, watch his hands. A liar talks with his hands. A liar can't keep them still. Clay Mercer's hands had not moved once. She did not know what to do with that information yet, but she filed it away, the way she filed away everything that might one day matter, in the small, careful storehouse at the back of her mind, where she kept the seeds for the next year's garden and the names of the men who had cheated her father and the count of every coin in the tin in the rafters. Outside, the wind picked up another notch. A cottonwood branch broke off somewhere and fell with a clatter onto the barn roof. The new boards held. Patience the cow lowed once in the lean-to, low and patient, as her name required. And far to the south, in a hotel room in the town of Bellwether, Silas Grady sat at a desk and looked at a hand-drawn map of Cimarron County, and he made a mark in pencil next to the name Hart, and beside the mark he wrote a single word and underlined it twice. The word was soon. The word was soon, and Silas Grady was a man who kept his appointments. He did not, however, keep them in person. Not at first. A man in his line of work learned early that the worst thing he could do was show his face too often before the ground was ready. So he sent letters instead. 3 of them in the first week of February, all on heavy paper with a fine engraved letterhead from a law office in Kansas City that did not, strictly speaking, exist except as a paid arrangement and a brass plate on a door. The first letter informed Miss Evelyn Hart that an unpaid tax assessment from 1889 had been discovered in the county records, and that the sum of $146.12 was due by the 1st of March, failing which proceedings would commence to seize the property in lieu of payment. The second letter, dated 3 days after the first, informed her that a man named Jeremiah Hart, deceased, had on the 11th of June 1878 taken a loan of $40 against the south quarter of the property, and that the loan, with interest, now stood at a sum of $318. And that the holder of the note was prepared to call it due. The third letter, dated 3 days after the second, was friendlier. It was from Silas Grady personally. He hoped she was keeping warm. He had heard, with great regret, that she was having some difficulty with old papers and old debts. He wanted her to know that his offer of November still stood. $4 an acre, cash on the table. No questions asked about the tax assessment or the old loan. A man, the letter said, could make problems disappear when he had a mind to. She read all 3 letters at the kitchen table by the yellow light of the kerosene lamp. and when she was done, she folded them in thirds and put them in the stove and watched them burn. Then she put on her coat. It was 4 miles to Clay Mercer's place by the road, and 2.5 if you cut across the back pasture and forded the creek where the bank was low. The creek was iced over solid by the second week of February, and she walked across it with the wind at her back and her father's revolver in the pocket of the big wool coat, because she had stopped going anywhere without it. Clay was in the south barn when she came up the lane. She knew because she could hear him before she could see him, the steady, hard tap of a hammer driving a nail in 3 blows, and a man's voice, low, saying something to a horse. She came around the corner of the barn and stopped in the door, and the hammering stopped, and Clay straightened up from where he was bent over the wheel of a buckboard with a new hub in his hand. "Miss Hart." "Mr. Mercer." He looked at her boots, which were caked with snow, looked at the creek water stain at the hem of her coat, looked at her face, which she knew was red from the wind and probably not as composed as she wanted it to be. "You walked." "I walked. You should have sent the boy if you needed me. He's been sleeping in your hayloft 3 nights a week." "I know where Hutch sleeps, Mr. Mercer. I needed the walk." He set the hub down on the workbench, wiped his hands on a rag that had once been a shirt. "Come in the house. There's coffee." "This won't take that long." "Miss Hart." "All right." She went with him across the yard. His house was a long, low thing of squared logs, twice the size of hers and 3 times as warm, with a porch that ran the whole front and a pair of leather chairs by the stove inside that had the look of being sat in by the same man for a long time. There was no sign of any other person living there. No woman's coat on the peg, no child's boot by the door. The place was clean the way a man's place is clean when he has had to learn it himself. Every surface useful, nothing decorative, the corners not quite as well done as the centers. He poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot on the back of the stove. Real coffee, no chicory. "Sit." She sat. "Tell me." She told him. About the 3 letters. About the tax assessment that did not exist because she had paid every tax bill her father had ever owed and had the receipts in the tin in the rafters. About the loan against the South Quarter that did not exist because her father had not borrowed $40 in 1878 or in any other year, having held a particular and well-known horror of debt that he had passed on to her like other men passed on a name. About the 3rd letter from Silas Grady himself, friendly, hoping she was warm. Clay listened without interrupting. When she was done, he was quiet for a minute, looking into his coffee cup the way a man looks into a well to judge how far down the water is. "I should have expected this sooner," he said. "You knew he would do this." "I knew he would do something. I thought he'd try the fence first, cut a wire, spook the cattle. That's his usual. The paper trail is new." "Why paper?" "Because of me." He looked up. He saw the partnership filing at the county seat. "Pendergast registered it the day after you signed. Grady would have had it on his desk inside a week. He knows if he cuts your fence now, he's cutting mine, and he knows what I do to men who cut my fence." "What do you do to men who cut your fence?" "I find them." He said it the way a man tells you the time. Flat. No heat in it. She felt the small hairs at the back of her neck stand up, and she did not know whether what she was feeling was fear of him or something else. "So he's using paper," she said. "He's using paper. The tax man in this county is a fellow named Boyd Hennessy. Boyd was sheriff 6 years ago and got voted out for cause, and the cause was that he could be bought for the price of a good saddle. He's the assessor now. Grady owns him. He filed a false assessment. And he probably filed a false note on the South Quarter, and he has a judge in his pocket 2 counties over who will hear an emergency petition without telling anyone in Cimarron about it. By the time you knew you'd been sued, you'd have lost." "Can he do that?" "He can try. Whether he can finish is a different question." She set her coffee down. Her hands, she noticed, were steady. That surprised her. She had walked the 2.5 miles thinking her hands would be shaking by the time she got here, and they were not. "Mr. Mercer." "Clay." "What?" "My name is Clay. Use it or don't, but stop calling me Mr. Mercer. We signed a paper. We're past Mr." She looked at him. "All right, Clay?" "Evelyn." "Yes." "That all right?" "Yes." "Good. Drink your coffee. It's getting cold." She drank her coffee. He drank his. The fire in the stove popped, a knot going off like a small gun, and they both looked at it and then looked back at each other and almost smiled. He won that one. The corner of his mouth went up first by maybe a quarter inch, and hers followed without permission, and then they were both pretending it had not happened, looking back into their cups. "What do we do?" she said. "We answer the paper with paper." Pendergast comes back up. He brings every receipt you've got. He pulls the original tax records from the county clerk, who is honest, and he files an affidavit of fraud against Hennessy by the end of next week. The phony loan, we challenge the same way. There is no note. There never was. The handwriting on whatever they produce will not match your father's, and we will get a man from Topeka who knows handwriting to say so under oath. That's expensive. It is. I can't. Stop. Just stop, Evelyn. This part is on me. We're partners. The water rights are on that paper too. And if Grady takes your land, he takes my water, and I will spend whatever I spend to keep that from happening. This is not charity. This is a man protecting his own interests. Are we clear? We're clear. Good. She set her cup down. She had a hard time looking at him, not from shame, from something else, harder to name. She made herself look up. "The third letter," she said, "the friendly one. He knows the first two are lies. He sent them to remind me that he can make a problem and then make it go away. He wants me to know he is the only person who can save me from him." That's right. He thinks I'll break. He thinks every woman alone breaks eventually. He's wrong. I know he's wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she said. "Why did you put your name on that water rights filing before he made his move? You could have waited. You could have let him squeeze me a little first and then come in and looked like the rescue. Why do it the day after?" He drank the last of his coffee, set the cup down, lined it up with a knot in the wood, the way he had done in her kitchen weeks before. "Because if I'd waited," he said, "I'd have been him, just with better manners." She did not have an answer to that. "Stay for supper," he said. "I'll have Tom drive you back in the wagon. It's too cold to walk that creek twice in a day. I'll stay for supper. I won't be driven back. I'll ride. You have a horse you can lend me." "I have a horse." "Then we are agreed. Then we are agreed." She stayed for supper. He cooked it himself, beans and salt pork and biscuits that were not good but were not bad either, and she did not offer to help and he did not ask. They ate at a plank table by the stove and they did not talk much. When they did talk, it was about practical things, the cattle, the creek, whether the ice on the north pasture pond would hold or whether it was time to chop a hole for the herd, the boy Hutch, and whether he was worth keeping past spring. Clay thought yes. Evelyn thought yes. The boy was slow, but he was kind to animals, and a man who was kind to animals could be taught the rest. When the meal was done, she helped him with the dishes, despite herself, because the silence of him washing alone in his own kitchen was a thing she could not sit through. He did not protest. He washed, she dried. Their hands touched once, passing a plate, and neither one of them remarked on it. Neither one of them remarked on the fact that neither one of them remarked on it. He saddled a chestnut mare for her, gentle in the mouth, sure-footed in snow. He walked her out to the gate of the yard. "Evelyn." "Yes." "He won't stop with letters." "I know." "He'll come up the lane in person within a month, probably sooner." "I know." "When he does, you send the boy down to me. You don't go out to meet him until I'm there." She sat on the chestnut and looked down at him. "Clay?" "Yes." "I appreciate the offer, but this is my land. If he comes up that lane, I will meet him at the gate, whether you are there or not." He looked at her in the half-light of the lantern by the post. The wind had dropped. The night was very cold and very clear, and the stars over Cimarron County were the size of nickels. "All right," he said. "Then I'd better be there." "That would be agreeable." "Good night, Evelyn." "Good night, Clay." She rode home across the iced-over creek with the chestnut mare picking her way careful, and the revolver heavy in her pocket, and her mind quieter than it had been in 2 months. 2 days later, the lawyer Pendergast came back up from Topeka, and he sat in her kitchen for 6 hours going through her father's papers. He took notes. He made copies. He left with a leather case fatter than it had come in, and a list of names of witnesses to interview in town, 3 of whom had known her father for 30 years and would testify under oath that the man had never borrowed 40 cents from anyone, let alone $40. A week after that, The same lawyer filed a sworn complaint against the county assessor Boyd Hennessy for falsification of records, and an emergency petition to dismiss the alleged note against the South Quarter on grounds of fraud and forgery, and an injunction to stop any seizure proceeding while the complaint was being heard. He filed all of it in the open. He filed it on a Monday morning when the courthouse was full of people. By Monday afternoon, it was the only thing anyone in Cimarron County wanted to talk about. By Wednesday, Boyd Hennessy had resigned as assessor, citing health reasons. By Friday, the rumor in town was that the most powerful rancher in Cimarron County had thrown the weight of his name behind a widow whose place was hardly worth saving, and that Silas Grady had been seen riding in and out of the hotel in Bellwether 3 times in 2 days, in and out, like a man who could not sit still in his own room. The talk traveled the way talk does, the way it always has and always will in a country where there is nothing else to do at night. It traveled from the courthouse to the saloons, and from the saloons to the boarding houses, and from the boarding houses to the little homesteads scattered out along the creeks and the section lines, where men and women who had been quietly losing things for years sat up at the supper table and looked at each other across the lamp and said, "Did you hear?" A man named Petrov, who ran 60 head on a quarter section north of town, came riding up Evelyn's Lane on the 3rd Saturday in February. He sat his horse at the gate for a long minute before he came in, the way a man does when he is not sure of his welcome. Evelyn came out onto the porch with the revolver in her coat pocket and her hand on it, because she had not yet learned to assume any rider was friendly. "Miss Hart," he called. "Mr. Petrov. Could I trouble you for a word? Get down. There's coffee." He got down. He took his hat off at the porch step. He was a thin man, 50 years old, with a face like a piece of harness leather and pale blue eyes that did not blink much. His grandfather had come over from somewhere in Russia before the war, and his father had homesteaded the quarter section before he was born, and Petrov had never been off it more than a week at a time in his whole life. He came in. He sat at the kitchen table. He took the cup she gave him and held it in both hands as if his hands were cold, even though the kitchen was warm. "Miss Hart, I've come to ask your advice." "My advice, Mr. Petrov?" "Yes, ma'am. There's a man been writing me letters about my place." She set her own cup down. "What's the man's name?" "Silas Grady," she breathed out slow. "Tell me what the letters said." He told her. They were almost the same letters she had received. A tax assessment from a year that did not match anything in his records. A note against a corner of his place that he had never borrowed against. A third letter, friendly, offering $4 an acre and the resolution of all difficulties. "I have not slept in a week," he said. "My wife is sick. She has been sick all winter. I cannot lose this place. We have nowhere else." Evelyn did not speak for a long moment. She was looking at the man's hands. They were trembling around the cup, very faintly, the way an old man's hands tremble when he has not eaten enough. "Mr. Petrov." "Ma'am?" "There is a lawyer in Topeka named Pendergast. He is a young man with spectacles, and he is honest, and he is going to be in this county on Tuesday next." "Ma'am, I cannot afford a lawyer. Pendergast has been retained by Clay Mercer for the work he is doing for me. He has agreed, at my request, to take other clients in this matter at a rate of $2 a day, which is less than half what he is worth. If you cannot pay $2 a day, I will pay it, and you will pay me back when you can, in eggs or labor or sweet corn in the summer. Are we agreed?" Petrov looked at her. "Ma'am?" "Are we agreed?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then come back on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, and you will meet him here." He set his cup down very careful, as if it might break, and then he put his face in his hands, and he sat that way for a long moment without making a sound. When he took his hands down, his eyes were wet, but he did not let any of it run. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when your land is still yours in June." "Yes, ma'am." He left. She stood on the porch and watched him go down the lane on his thin chestnut, sitting straight in the saddle the way men of his country sat, the wind catching the brim of his hat. She watched until he was past the cottonwoods. Then she went inside and sat down at the table, and she did, finally, let herself shake a little, but only for a minute, and only in the privacy of her own kitchen, where there was nobody to see it but the cast-iron stove and the kettle and the revolver on the shelf above. She had not asked for this. She had set out 2 months before to save one piece of land, which was hers, which she could draw with her eyes closed every fence line and every corner stone. She had not set out to save Petrov's quarter section or anyone else's. She did not know how Petrov would have heard her name in connection with a lawyer from Topeka. She did not know who had told him to come to her. She had her suspicions. That evening, Clay rode up the lane on the Big Bay. He came at his usual hour, which was just before supper, on the days he came at all, which had become most days. He tied the bay on the lee side of the barn and came around to the kitchen door and knocked once and opened it without waiting. Petrov was here, she said before he had his hat off. I heard. Heard from who? Heard from Petrov. He came past my place on his way back. He told you what I said. He told me you'd hired Pendergast for him. I told him I would pay if he couldn't. I know what you told him. She turned from the stove. She had a wooden spoon in her hand, dripping a little stew onto the floor. She did not notice. You're angry. I'm not angry. You look angry. Evelyn. He took his hat off, set it crown down on the table. I am not angry. I am thinking. There is a difference. What are you thinking? I am thinking that you have just made yourself a target 3 times the size of the target you already were. Petrov needed... I know what Petrov needed. I would have paid for it myself if he had come to me. He did not come to me. He came to you because the word in town is that you are the woman to come to. Do you understand what that means? It means people are not as alone as they thought. It means Grady cannot let you stand. She set the spoon down on the rest, wiped her hand on her apron, came over to the table and sat down across from him. Clay. Yes. I knew that when I told Petrov to come back on Tuesday. He looked at her for a long moment. I know you did, he said. That is what I am thinking about. The fire in the stove popped. Outside, the wind was getting up again. The cottonwoods had begun, very faintly, in the deepest cold of February, to show the first hard knots of bud at the tips of the branches, the kind of bud that would not open for 2 more months, but was the body of the tree saying, I am still here. I am not done. There is something else, Clay said. What? Pendergast had a man up from Kansas City do some digging on Grady. The man came back yesterday. Grady is not working alone. He is fronting for a syndicate out of Chicago. There are 6 men in it. They have done this in Nebraska, and they have done it in the Indian Territory, and they have done it in 2 counties in eastern Colorado. They squeeze the small holders out for the railroad spur, and then they sell the right-of-way to the railroad for 40 times what they paid the holders. They have a great deal of money. They have political men in Topeka. They have at least 2 judges. She listened to him without moving. So this is bigger than Grady, she said. Or Grady is 1 man. The thing behind him is not 1 man. Can we beat it? I don't know. He said it the way he said everything, flat, no decoration. She appreciated that about him. She would have walked out of the kitchen if he had lied to her then. Clay. Yes. I am not going to sell. I want to be very clear about that, in case there comes a moment in the next month when you think you should suggest it to me, for my own good. I'm not going to sell. Not for $4, not for 14. I will die on this porch before I sell. He looked at her across the table. The lamplight was on her face from the side, and he could see for the first time that she was 31 years old and tired and beautiful, in the hard, plain way of a woman who has used her face for living in and not for ornament. I know you won't, he said. That is not what I came to suggest. What did you come to suggest? I came to tell you what I just told you about the syndicate, and to tell you that I am going to send a man of mine to Bellwether tomorrow to take a hotel room across the hall from Grady's and watch his door and tell me every time he comes and goes and with whom. And to tell you that there is a man named Asa Bright who used to be a deputy marshal in the territory before he came to work for me. And Asa is going to be on your place from sunup to sundown starting Monday. And on the nights when I am not here, he is going to be in your barn, and he is going to be armed. Clay, I know. You can handle it yourself. You have said so, and I believe you. This is in addition to what you can handle. Are we clear? She wanted to argue. She had a whole argument lined up in the back of her throat, ready to go. She did not let it out. She thought about Petrov's hands trembling around the coffee cup. She thought about the 3 letters in the stove. She thought about her father, who had said, Evie, the worst thing pride ever did was make a person die alone when they didn't have to. We are clear, she said. Good. He stood up. picked up his hat, put it on. "Stay for supper," she said. "I shouldn't." "It's stew. It's better than yours." He paused. "All right," he said. He took the hat back off, hung it on the peg by the door. Outside, the wind began to drop, and somewhere over the dead cottonwoods, the first crow of the evening called 3 notes, falling, and a single light came on in a window 2 miles away across the prairie, where Tom Riley's wife was lighting a lamp for her husband's coming home, and the long, slow February night settled down over Cimarron County like a hand laid flat upon a sleeping animal, holding it still, holding it close, for whatever the morning would bring. Whatever the morning would bring came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks later, and it did not announce itself with letters. By then the worst of February had broken. The wind still had teeth, but the sun came up earlier and stayed longer, and on the south side of the barn a thin line of mud showed where the snow had finally given up the fight. Patience the cow grew heavy and slow, due any day. The boy Hutch had moved into the lean-to off the barn for good and had stopped going back to the bunkhouse altogether, because, as he put it, Miss Hart's cooking is improving and Mr. Mercer's never did. Asa Bright slept in the hayloft most nights, a thin, gray-haired man who had been a deputy marshal in the Indian Territory for 14 years, and who spoke about 4 words a day and missed none of what was said by anyone else. Pendergast was up from Topeka every Wednesday and most Fridays. The fraud complaint against Boyd Hennessy had become an indictment. The phony note against the South Quarter had been thrown out by a judge in the county seat, who, it turned out, did not like to be embarrassed in his own courtroom. 3 other small ranchers, besides Petrov, had come up Evelyn's Lane with hat in hand, and 3 other small ranchers had been sent to Pendergast, and the talk in town had gone from "Did you hear?" to "Have you heard the latest?" What none of them had heard yet, on that Tuesday morning, was that Silas Grady had finally run out of patience. He came up the lane at 10 in the morning with 6 men behind him. Evelyn was at the stove rendering lard from the pig Tom Riley had butchered the week before. She heard them before she saw them, the dull, soft thunder of 7 horses at a walk, and she set down the wooden spoon and went to the kitchen window. She counted them twice. 6 men, and Grady. 2 of the men she had seen before, the ones who had come with him in November. 4 she did not know. All of them were armed openly. Not rifles in scabbards, not coats covering pistols. Open. Rifles across saddlebows, revolvers on hips. One of the new men had a coach gun broken over his arm the way a hunter carries one when he wants the birds to know he is coming. She did not panic. She did not even feel her heart change rhythm, which surprised her, because she had expected to. She felt instead a kind of clearing, the way a kitchen feels when you sweep the last of the morning's clutter off the table. She went to the kitchen door and opened it and stepped onto the porch. "Hutch!" The boy was in the yard, splitting kindling. He looked up. "Yes, ma'am." "You see the riders coming up the lane?" "Yes, ma'am." "You go right now, out the back of the barn. Take the sorrel mare. You ride to Mr. Mercer's place, and you tell him Silas Grady is here with 6 armed men. You tell him I am at the south fence. You ride hard, and you do not stop, and you do not look back. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am." "Go." The boy went. He set down the axe, and he went. He did not run, because he had a kind of dignity in him that ran deeper than his slowness. But he moved with purpose, around the barn and out of sight. And a minute later she heard the sorrel mare go out the back gate at a hard canter and into the brush along the creek bottom where she could not be seen from the lane. She went back inside. She took the revolver down from the shelf above the stove. She broke it open and checked the load. 6 chambers. She closed it. She put it in the deep pocket of the heavy wool coat. She put the coat on. She tied her hair back tighter than it already was, with a strip of leather, the way her father had tied his hair in the bad years. She picked up her father's old Winchester from the corner by the door, the one with the worn smooth stock and the action that had been cleaned and oiled the night before, and she levered around into the chamber and let the hammer down to half cock. Then she went out the kitchen door, around the house, and down through the yard toward the south fence, where the lane met the property line, and where Grady would have to stop because the gate was closed and chained, and the chain had a new lock on it that Tom Riley had put on in January. She walked. She did not hurry. She had thought, in the seconds after she had seen the riders, that she would run. She did not run. There was no point in running. They would wait for her. They had come up the lane to be seen coming up the lane, and they would wait at the gate to be seen waiting, because the whole purpose of the visit was the seeing. By the time she got to the gate, they were there, sitting their horses in a loose half circle on the lane side of the chain. Grady in front, on a tall gray that he sat well, with a long buffalo coat over a town suit and a flat-brimmed black hat, and gloves of pale yellow leather that did not belong in this country. Behind him, the 6 men, in the kind of arrangement that men who have ridden together a while fall into without thinking, 2 on either side, 2 behind, a fan. She stopped on her side of the gate with her hand on the top rail. The Winchester she held down along her right leg, the muzzle to the ground, because her father had told her once that a rifle pointed at a man was a rifle that had to be fired or put down with apology. And there was a time for each, but the first 10 seconds of a meeting was neither. Mr. Grady. Miss Hart. He smiled. He had a wide, soft, well-shaved smile, and the kind of teeth that came from a town dentist who used gold. He took his hat off and held it on his thigh. "You look well," he said. "I had heard you were having a difficult winter." "I have been having an interesting winter, Mr. Grady. You are part of why." "Yes, about that." He shifted in the saddle. The gray under him shifted with him. The 6 men behind did not move. "Miss Hart, I have come up here today because I believe you and I have allowed a number of small misunderstandings to grow into a larger one. The matter of the tax assessment, the matter of the old note. These were clerical issues that should have been resolved without lawyers and without theater, and I take some of the responsibility for that. I should have come up to see you myself, in November, and made my offer in person. Instead, I sent letters, and letters have a way of being misread." They were read perfectly. "Be that as it may." He smiled again. The smile was getting harder. "I would like today to make you a new offer, an improved offer, $6 an acre, paid in full, in coin, today. I have the money with me. I have a contract with me. I have brought a notary, who is the gentleman on my left with the spectacles." She looked at the man on his left, a small, unhappy-looking man with spectacles and a satchel, who was clearly not enjoying his morning. "That is a great deal of money, Miss Hart." "It is. It would set you up handsomely. A house in town. A small business of your own, perhaps. You are a young woman. You have a great many years ahead of you. You should not spend them on a piece of ground that takes more from you than it gives." "Mr. Grady." "Ma'am." "What is it taking from me today that you would not take twice as much of tomorrow?" He let the smile go. It went slowly, the way a window shuts on a stiff frame. What was left was a face very different from the one he had walked in with. Not cruel. Worse than cruel. Patient. "Miss Hart, I am going to be plain. I have been polite for 4 months. I am out of polite. I am not selling. You will sell. Today, for $6 an acre, with my goodwill. Or in April for $2 an acre, because your fences will be down again, and your cattle will be scattered across 3 counties, and your barn will have burned, and you will have no choice. I am giving you the chance to take the better road. It is a kindness." "It is not a kindness." "Then call it what you want. Sign the paper." "No." He looked at her for a long second. "Miss Hart, I have 6 men with me. You have a rifle and a porch and what I assume is a revolver in your pocket. Let us be adults about this." She moved the Winchester from her right leg up to the cross of her left arm. Not a threat, just a different position, the muzzle still down. But her hand was now on the lever and her finger on the trigger guard, and the men in the half-circle behind Grady saw her do it, and one of them, the one with the coach gun, shifted his weight forward in the saddle. "Mr. Grady." "Ma'am." "You're on the wrong side of my fence. I am on the public lane, which is not your fence. You are on the wrong side of my fence in every way that matters. I'm going to ask you to turn your horses around and go back the way you came. And if I do not, then we will find out what happens." He laughed. It was a short laugh, and it had no warmth in it, but it was a real laugh. And it told her that he had not, until that moment, fully understood that he might not get what he had come for. "Miss Hart, I have respect for courage. I do. But courage is not a substitute for sense." And he did not finish the sentence. He did not finish it because behind her, from the direction of her house, came the sound of more horses. A lot of horses. She did not look back. She had learned from her father that you did not look back when other men were watching your face. You let them look back. You watched theirs. She watched Grady's. She watched it change. She watched it change because Clay Mercer came up behind her with 11 men. She knew it was 11 without counting because Tom Riley had told her once that Clay's working role was 12 hands counting himself, and one was always at the home place, so the maximum he could bring on short notice was 11. She had not been certain he would bring all 11. He had brought all 11. They came up the inside of the fence line at a long trot, in a loose double column, and they did not slow when they reached her. They split. They went around her on either side, 6 men to her right and 5 to her left, including Clay on the bay at the head of the right column and Tom Riley at the head of the left. And they spread out along the inside of the south fence in a straight line about 20 yards long, with about 10 feet between each man. Most of them had rifles across their thighs. 2 had shotguns. Asa Bright, on a small dun horse near the end of the right column, had a Winchester laid casually across his saddle bow with the muzzle pointed in the general direction of the man with the coach gun. And he was not looking at the man with the coach gun, and the man with the coach gun knew it. Clay walked the bay forward until he was even with Evelyn at the gate. He did not say anything to her. He did not look at her. He looked at Grady. "Silas, Mercer, you're a long way up the lane. I am where I have business." "You don't have business here. I have business with the owner of this property. The owner of this property has invited you to leave." "The owner of this property, Silas." Clay's voice did not rise. It got softer. The men behind Grady felt the softness, and one of them, the one on the far left, moved his hand a quarter-inch closer to his belt. Asa Bright saw the move, and the Winchester across the Dun's saddle moved a quarter-inch with it, and the man on the far left went very still. "Silas, you came up here with 6 men because you thought she would be alone. She is not alone. You have a choice to make in the next 30 seconds, and I am going to make it easy for you. You can turn your horse around and ride back down this lane, and we will all go home and have our suppers. Or you can stay, and we will find out which of us has more men with steady hands. I have 11. I count 6 of you. The math is bad. Mercer, I'm not done. There is a third thing you should know before you decide. Pendergast filed a petition in district court yesterday afternoon. A petition to enjoin you, personally, and every man in the syndicate behind you, by name, from any further attempt to acquire property in Cimarron County through the assessor's office or through any other fraudulent paper. The list of names is 6 long. I will not say them out loud here, but the petition has been served. Your friends in Chicago know by now. They are not pleased with you, Silas. They are looking for a way to keep their distance. You came up this lane today thinking you would close this matter and clean up your standing with them. What you are about to do instead is hand them an excuse to throw you over the side of the wagon, ride down, or stay. But know what you're choosing. Grady's face did a thing during that speech that Evelyn would remember the rest of her life. It went through 3 or 4 different shapes very fast, like a man trying on hats. The first was anger. The second was calculation. The third was a kind of bewilderment, very brief, the look of a man who is realizing for the first time in possibly a year that something he was sure of had been a misunderstanding the whole time. The fourth was the soft, well-shaved smile from the beginning, put back on, badly. Mercer, Silas, you are making a serious mistake. The syndicate will hang you out by spring, and you know it. Ride down. Miss Hart. She did not turn her head toward him. Yes. My offer of $6 an acre stands for 1 more week. I urge you to consider it carefully and without the influence of Mr. Grady. Ma'am. Get off my lane. There was a long moment then, maybe 4 seconds, in which nobody moved. The wind dropped almost completely. Somewhere far off across the prairie, a meadowlark called, the first one Evelyn had heard that year, a single bright, stupid, hopeful note that did not belong in February but had come up anyway. And they all heard it, and none of them remarked on it. Then Grady pulled the gray's head around. He did it gentle. He did not jerk the rein because he was a man who liked his horse, and a man who did not want, on top of everything else, to be remembered for handling his horse badly in front of witnesses. He pulled the gray's head around, and he walked it back the way he had come. And after a beat, the 6 men behind him pulled their horses around too, in the same order, and they followed him at a walk down the long lane between the dead cottonwoods toward the road. Nobody on Evelyn's side moved or spoke until the riders were past the last cottonwood and the dust of their going had settled. Then Tom Riley let out a breath like he had been holding it for half a year. "Well," he said. Clay swung down off the bay. He came around to Evelyn's side of the gate, and he stopped a step away from her. And he looked at her, and he did not, for the first time she could recall, have any expression on his face at all. He had used all of his expression up on Grady. "You all right?" "I am all right." "Your hands." She looked down at her hands. The right one, holding the Winchester, was steady. The left one, on the top rail of the gate, was not. She watched it shake for a couple of seconds, with academic interest as if it were somebody else's hand. "They are doing it on their own," she said. "It is not me. It is you. It just isn't your mind. All right?" He put his own hand on the top rail of the gate, not touching hers but close enough that she could feel the heat of him through the leather of his glove. They stood that way for a few seconds. "Clay." "Yes." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." "You said that to Petrov." "I am saying it to you. Don't thank me yet. Grady is going to do something stupid in the next 2 weeks. We are not done." "I know we are not done." "All right." He took his hand off the rail. He turned to his men, who were sitting their horses along the inside of the fence in a loose, silent line, watching the dust at the end of the lane. "Boys," they turned their heads, "you're going to talk about this in town tonight. I cannot stop you, and I am not going to try. But I'm going to ask you to remember a few things when you talk. Miss Hart was here at the gate before any of us. She came down with a rifle and she stood her ground, and she did not give an inch. She was not behind us. We were behind her. Are we clear?" There was a chorus of yes sirs along the line. And one other thing. Petrov and Bell and Hauer and the Yost brothers. They live a long way from town in 4 different directions. There's going to be talk going on tonight that is going to make them feel either safer or more frightened, depending on how it is told. I want it told in a way that makes them feel safer. We are not the only people fighting this fight. We are part of a fight. Are we clear? Yes, sirs, again, quieter this time, more thoughtful. All right. Tom, take 6 men and ride the boundary. I want every foot of fence looked at before dark. Asa, take the rest and water at the creek, and then ride back to my place by the long way around the south pasture. I want to know who is on my land between here and home before sundown. Move. They moved. Tom Riley split off 6 men with a jerk of his chin, and they trotted east along the inside of the south fence. Asa Bright took the rest and walked them toward the creek crossing. Within 2 minutes, the lane was empty of everyone but Clay and Evelyn and the bay gelding, which had put its head down and started cropping at a piece of brown winter grass that had pushed up through the snowmelt by the gatepost. Evelyn lowered the Winchester. She let the hammer all the way down. She leaned the rifle against the inside of the gatepost, slow, careful, the way a person handles a tool that has just been used for serious work and might be used again. She turned to Clay. "Hutch." "He came in hard. The mare is going to need rubbing down. The boy did fine." "Send him in for breakfast. He hasn't eaten. He's already in your kitchen, Evelyn. He went in the back door before he came to me. He's been eating biscuits since 7 o'clock. She laughed. It came out without her permission, a short, startled sound, and then it kept going for a couple of seconds, and Clay watched her with the faintest tightening at the corner of his mouth, the closest he came to laughing with her. And then it died down and she wiped at her eye with the back of her wrist because there was something there that she did not want to call by its name. "Clay." "Yes." "You said the syndicate would throw him over by spring." "They will." "What does he do then?" He looked down the empty lane. The dust was gone. The meadowlark called again, off somewhere south, and this time another one answered it from the east. "A man like Grady thrown over by men like that," Clay said. "He does one of 2 things. He runs, or he comes back with 1 man and a grudge, and tries to make a private point. The first is more likely. The second is more dangerous. We are going to plan for both." "All right. Come up to the house with me tonight after supper. I want to show you something." "What?" "A map of the spur line. The route the railroad would actually have taken if the syndicate had gotten its way. It is not what Grady told you in November. It is worse. It runs through 6 of the small holdings, not 3. The men who built that map are going to be after this county again, in some form, in a year or 2. We need to be ready. All right. He looked at her for a long second. Evelyn.
Yes? You did well today. So did you. No, I came up the lane with 11 men and the law on my side. That is not doing well. That is doing what was easy for me. You came down to that gate alone before any of us with a rifle in your hand, knowing that if we did not get here in time, you were going to die in this lane. That is doing well.
She did not answer him. She did not trust herself to. She put her hand out and laid it flat on the top rail of the gate, next to where his had been, where the wood was still slightly warm. He nodded once, as if she had answered him after all, and he picked up the reins of the bay gelding and led the horse through the open gate, into her yard, the way a man comes home from a long road. The bay's hooves made a soft sound on the packed earth of the yard, and somewhere over the dead cottonwoods a crow called 3 notes, falling, and the long, bright, cold morning of the first week of March settled in around them as they walked side by side up toward the house, where a slow-witted boy of 19 was working his way through a 4th biscuit at her kitchen table and did not yet know that the world had just shifted by one small visible inch under the feet of every man and woman in Cimarron County. The slow-witted boy of 19 was on his 4th biscuit, and when Evelyn came in through the kitchen door, he stood up so fast he knocked the chair over backwards and stood there blinking at her with a streak of butter on his chin. "Ma'am?" "Sit down, Hutch. Eat your biscuit." "Yes, ma'am." He picked up the chair. He sat down. He ate the biscuit. He did not, however, take his eyes off her, and she understood after a second that he had not, until that moment, been entirely sure she was coming back from the gate alive. "Hutch." "Ma'am." "You did exactly what I asked you to do, and you did it fast, and you did not stop. I want you to know that. I will not forget it." He went red in the ears the way he did, and looked down at the plate, and said something into his collar that might have been thank you and might have been anything else. Clay came in behind her, stamped his boots on the mat, hung his hat on the peg, sat down at the table across from the boy. Evelyn poured them all coffee without asking. There was a quality to the kitchen in that hour that she would think about later, a quietness that was not the quiet of relief exactly, more like the quiet of a room after a heavy piece of furniture has finally been set down. By noon, the news of the standoff was halfway across the county, and by sundown, it had outrun her. Tom Riley's wife told it at the dry goods store. The man from the dry goods store told it at the livery. The livery man told it to 2 riders coming through from a place 40 miles south, and they carried it down the road to a stage stop where a man named Calhoun, who ran the stop, told it to everyone who came in for coffee for the next 3 days, and Calhoun was a man who could improve on a story while still keeping its bones true. By the end of the first week of March, there were 2 or 3 versions in circulation, and Evelyn heard one of them from a stranger before she heard any of the others from a friend. The stranger was a woman. She came up the lane on a buckboard wagon on a Thursday morning, a thin woman in a black bonnet with a face that had been lined long before her years had earned it, and she had 2 children in the wagon with her, a girl of about 7 and a boy of about 4. She stopped at the gate. She did not get down. Evelyn came out on the porch and looked at her, and the woman looked back, and finally she called out across the yard in a voice that did not have much air behind it.
"Are you Miss Hart?" "I am." "My name is Annabelle. My husband is Frank Bell. We have the quarter section 3 miles east of Petrov. I heard you stood down Silas Grady at this gate. Is that true?" "Mr. Mercer stood with me. So did 11 of his men." "That is not what I asked." Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. "Come down off the wagon, Mrs. Bell. There is coffee. The children, too." "I will not stay long." "Stay as long as you need to." She came down. She lifted the boy first, then the girl, and the girl took the boy's hand and they walked behind their mother in the steady, careful way of farm children who had been told once how to behave and had not forgotten. Inside the kitchen, Annabelle sat down at the table and would not take her coat off. Evelyn poured coffee. She gave the children biscuits with apple butter on them. The girl said, "Thank you, ma'am." The boy ate. "My husband is not well," Annabelle said. "He has not been well since November. He is in the bed today. He cannot sit up for more than an hour at a time. We have 160 acres and 20 head of cattle, and the cattle are thin. A man came to our place in January with letters, then again in February. The man is not Mr. Grady. The man is someone Mr. Grady sent, named Hollis. Mr. Hollis told my husband that if we did not sign by the end of March, we would be in court by April and on the road by May. My husband cannot be in court. My husband cannot be on the road. I have come up here today, Miss Hart, because I have not slept in 3 weeks, and I do not know what to do, and somebody told me you would know. Evelyn looked at her own hands on the table. They were steady today. She had practiced since the morning at the gate, holding them steady. She had not known until that morning that her hands had been afraid for years. Mrs. Bell? Yes. Tell me what your husband owes exactly, not what the letter says you owe, what the receipts say you owe. We owe $42 at the feed store. We owe the doctor in Bellwether $18. We owe nothing else. $60. Yes.
And the letter says you owe what? $396. Of course it does. She got up. She went to the cupboard. She took down the tin from the high shelf where it lived now, instead of the rafters, because the rafters had felt like an admission and the cupboard felt like a household. She opened the tin. She counted out $60 in coin and folded paper, and she pushed it across the table. Annabelle looked at it. No. Mrs. Bell?
I did not come here for money. I will not take money. We are not begging. You are not begging, and this is not a gift. You're going to pay the feed store, and you are going to pay the doctor, and you are going to bring me the receipts. When the receipts are in your hand and the bills are dead, you will come to me again, and we will go together to Mr. Pendergast, the lawyer, who is being paid out of Mr. Mercer's pocket for work he is doing for a number of us. Pendergast will take your letters, and he will take the receipts, and he will file a complaint against Mr. Hollis, the same as he filed against Mr. Hennessy, and the letters will stop. You are not begging, Mrs. Bell. You are borrowing $60 from a neighbor at no interest against the next calf crop, which you will pay back to me at the going price when the calves are sold. We will write it down on a piece of paper before you leave today, and we will both sign it. Are we clear?
Annabelle did not answer for almost a minute. The girl had stopped eating her biscuit and was watching her mother's face with the unblinking attention of a child who has learned to read weather. The boy went on eating, oblivious, butter on his chin in the same place Hutch had had it the day of the standoff. Miss Hart. Yes. Why are you doing this? It was the second time she had been asked the question in 3 months, in nearly the same words. The first time had been her asking it of Clay, and she had not been satisfied with his answer at the time, and she had thought about that answer many times since, and she understood now what he had meant and why he had not been able to say it any cleaner. She tried this time to do better than he had done. Because somebody planted a garden in front of your house this winter, Mrs. Bell. I do not understand. You kept a garden going. We had a few rows of kale and some turnips. You kept the children alive on a quarter section with a sick husband and 20 thin cattle in the worst winter in 10 years. And you did it by knowing how to plant a winter garden in Kansas, which is not a thing most women in this country can do. You did not give up. I did not give up. We are not the kind of women who give up. The world is going to have to learn that one widow and one wife of a sick man at a time, and it is going to start learning it today. That is why. Annabelle looked down at the coins and the folded bills on the table. She looked at her daughter, who was looking at her. She looked at her son, who was eating his biscuit. She picked up the money, slowly, and she put it inside the front of her coat, against her body, the way a woman in this country carried money that mattered. All right, she said. All right, Miss Hart. Evelyn. Evelyn. I am Anna. Anna. They wrote the paper. They signed it. Evelyn put her copy in the tin. Annabelle put hers inside her coat with the money. The children were given a second biscuit for the road, and the boy fell asleep against the girl's shoulder on the way back to the wagon, and Anna lifted him up and laid him in the wagon bed on a folded quilt, and the girl climbed up next to him without a word, and Anna got up on the seat and picked up the reins. Anna. Yes. Tell your husband to hold on until April. The grass will be up by then. The cattle will fatten. By June, he will be sitting on the porch again, watching the children chase the chickens. I have seen this before in my father, who was sick one whole winter and well by spring. It takes a long time, but it does come. All right, Evelyn. And Anna. Yes. If Mr. Hollis comes back to your place before Pendergast gets to him, you do not meet him at the gate. You send for me. We will come up the road with men. Are we clear? We are clear. She drove off down the lane. Evelyn watched her go. She stood on the porch for a long time after the buckboard was out of sight, and then she went back inside and she sat down at the table and she put her elbows on the table and her face in her hands, and she allowed herself, in the privacy of her own kitchen, to be tired. Not afraid. tired. There was a difference. She had only just learned it. The work that came at her after the standoff did not look like the work that had come before. Before the standoff, the work had been the work of one place, repairing one fence, fixing one roof, tending one garden. After the standoff, the work was the work of a county. Pendergast set up a temporary office in the back room of the dry goods store in town, 2 days a week. He charged the smallholders $1 a day, paid in eggs or smoked meat or labor on his own modest place outside Topeka, where his widowed mother lived. Clay paid the difference. Clay also paid for the trips Pendergast made to Topeka to file the complaints, and for the man from Kansas City who had dug into the syndicate, and for a second man who came down from Lincoln to look at handwriting in 2 of the phony notes. The complaints were filed in clusters, 3 or 4 at a time, all in open court, all on Mondays when the courthouse was full. By the middle of March, 4 men associated with Grady's operation had been named in formal proceedings. 2 of them resigned positions they had held in the county. One of them, a deputy clerk at the courthouse named Foley, was indicted by a grand jury for falsifying records. The fourth, a man named Hollis, who had been Grady's runner among the smaller holders, simply disappeared one night out of his rooming house in Bellwether and was not seen in the county again. Grady himself stayed in Bellwether but became, in the way of men whose footing has gone slack, smaller. The men who had ridden up Evelyn's Lane with him in March were not seen with him after the first week. The hotel where he had kept his rooms began to send a boy with his bill more often than it had used to. A man who had been seen drinking with him in early February, a banker out of Topeka named Hale, came in on a Friday in mid-March and did not so much as nod to him in the dining room. Clay said, "Of all this, very little." He said only once, sitting at Evelyn's kitchen table on a Sunday evening with the map of the proposed spur line unfolded between them, "He is not done. Men like that have nothing to be done from. They lose the structure, and the structure was all there was. They will try one more thing." What? I do not know yet, but the longer it takes him to try it, the worse it will be when it comes. She looked across the map at him. The lamp was between them, and his face was half in shadow. "You have been here every day for 2 weeks, Clay." "Most days. Every day." "I have been here every day." "You have your own place, your own cattle, your own work." "My work is being done. Tom Riley is running the south pasture. Asa is running the home barn. The boy Hutch is here because I sent him here. I am where I need to be." "Are you?" He looked at her over the lamp. "Evelyn." "Yes. I am here because I want to be here, not because the place needs me. The place needs me less every week. You have rebuilt half of it with your own hands, and the rest is held up by Tom and the boy. I am here because I prefer this kitchen to my own." She did not answer for a moment. She traced a line on the map with her finger, a creek line, the long bend where her father had built a stone weir 30 years before for watering cattle in dry months. The weir was still there. She had cleaned the silt out of it the previous summer, alone, in 2 long days. "Clay." "Yes, I am 31 years old. I have been a wife, and I have been a widow, and I have buried a child I did not get to name, and a father I am still grieving. I do not want to be anybody's wife again." "I have not asked you to be." "I know. I am telling you in advance in case the asking is forming up." He did not laugh. He did not get angry. He looked at her steadily across the lamp. "Evelyn, may I say a thing?" "Yes. I was married once. I was 26. Her name was Carrie. She died in childbirth at 24. The child died too. That was 16 years ago, and I have not been with another woman since, not in any way that mattered. I am not lonely. I am the kind of man who is not lonely. I run 1,000 head, and I have my men, and I have my horses, and that has been enough." "All right. I am telling you that because I want you to know I am not coming up this lane because I am lonely and I need a woman to fill a house. I came up this lane the first time because I was curious. I came up the second time because I had made a bargain. I have come up every time after that because I cannot, when I am at my place, stop thinking about the fact that you are at your place, and I would rather be wherever you are. I do not know what to call that. I am not going to call it by any name yet. I am only telling you it is true." She was quiet for a long minute. "That is the most words I have heard you say in a row," she said finally. "Yes. I will think on it. That is all I am asking." "Clay." "Yes. You have not asked me anything." I am not going to ask anything. I am going to be here and we will see what happens. If a day comes when you want me to ride down the lane and not come back, you will tell me and I will go and we will keep the partnership clean and that will be the end of it.
That will not be the day. All right? I am only saying it will not be that day. All right, Evelyn. She folded the map. She put it back in its tube. She got up and put on the kettle for fresh coffee because she did not know what else to do with her hands.
The week after that conversation, on a Tuesday at dawn, Patience the cow finally calved, and the calf was a heifer, alive. And Evelyn cried in the lean-to for the first time in a year, and the boy Hutch found her there and stood in the doorway for a long minute before he came in and put one large clumsy hand on her shoulder and said, "She is a fine calf, ma'am, and you ought to name her something." And Evelyn, wiping her eyes with the back of her wrist, said, "I will name her Anna." And the boy nodded as if that were the only possible name for the heifer, and went and got fresh hay. The week after that, Tom Riley's older daughter came up the lane on a small mule to deliver a tin of preserved peaches from her mother. The girl was 10 years old. She had been taught to read by her mother out of a Missouri primer, and she was now, her mother had told Evelyn the last time they met in town, reading anything she could get her hands on, including the labels of patent medicine bottles, which her mother thought was not entirely a good thing. Miss Hart. Lila. Mama sent these. Tell your mother I am much obliged. Will you stay for a piece of bread? Yes, ma'am. Lila came in. She sat at the kitchen table the way her father did, with her hat in her lap. She ate a piece of bread with apple butter on it. She looked around the kitchen with the patient, careful eyes of a child who was used to looking at rooms and making decisions about them. Miss Hart. Yes. My pa says you saved the county. Your pa is exaggerating, Lila. He doesn't exaggerate, ma'am. He says other people exaggerate. He doesn't. Evelyn did not know what to say to that. He says Mr. Mercer is a different man since he started coming up here. He says Mr. Mercer used to ride past our place without speaking, and now he stops and asks after Mama and asks how I am doing with my reading. He says you have changed him. Lila. Yes, ma'am. People do not get changed by other people. They change because the time has come for them to change, and another person is sometimes the door through which the change walks. Lila chewed her bread and thought about that. That is a complicated thing, ma'am. It is complicated, Lila. Did Mr. Mercer change you? Evelyn looked at the girl across the table. The girl looked back. There was nothing in her face but honest curiosity, the kind that had not yet learned to be ashamed of itself. He has been the door through which a number of changes have walked. Yes. That is a good way to put it, ma'am. It is the best I can do today. Lila finished her bread. She thanked Evelyn for it. She got up. At the door she stopped, the way her father stopped at doors before he said the last and most important thing he had come to say. Miss Hart. Yes.
Mama wanted me to tell you a thing. She said to tell it to you when you were alone. She said Mr. Mercer's first wife, Carrie, was her cousin. Mama grew up with her. She said Carrie would have liked you. She said to tell you that. Evelyn stood very still. Tell your mother I thank her, Lila. I will, ma'am. And Lila. Yes, ma'am. Tell her I would like, when the weather warms, to have her come up here for an afternoon with you and your sister. I would like to know her better. I will tell her, ma'am. The girl went out. The mule was tied to the gate. She climbed up on the gate to reach the saddle, the way a small person does, and she rode off down the lane with her thin straight back and her hat tied under her chin. And Evelyn watched her go and then went inside and sat down on the kitchen chair and did not move for a long time. That night, when Clay came up, she did not say anything about the visit, and he did not ask. They sat at the table and went through the new map Pendergast had brought, a corrected map of the proposed spur line that showed clearly the falsification that had been done in the original syndicate documents, and Clay marked the holdings that were still vulnerable. And Evelyn made notes in the small leather book she had started keeping in February, the book where she kept the names of every neighbor who had come to her, and what they owed, and what they had paid back, and what they had brought instead of money. There were 9 names in the book by the middle of March. By the end of the month, there were 13. The work changed the shape of her days. She got up at 4. She did the chickens. She milked the cow. She fed the heifer Anna, who was healthy and demanding and grew at a pace that startled her. She cleaned and cooked and wrote in the book. By 8 in the morning, she was usually on a horse, Either the chestnut Clay had given her in February, which was hers now in a way that nobody had quite stated out loud, or the old gelding mister, who was good for short trips at a slow walk. She rode out to the small holdings 2 or 3 times a week. She listened to women. She listened to men. She wrote down what they said. She brought it back and gave it to Pendergast on Wednesday mornings in the back room of the dry goods store. And Pendergast read her notes the way another lawyer would read a sworn affidavit and use them to file the complaints that were, by April, the most reliable source of news in the county. She was not the only one doing the work. Clay was doing his share, in his way. Pendergast was doing the legal part. Asa Bright and Tom Riley were keeping the boundaries safe. The boy Hutch was somehow doing more than any of them because he was 19 years old and he had decided sometime in February that Evelyn Hart hung the moon, and he would have walked through a wall for her without being asked, and frequently almost did. But the names in the leather book were her names, written in her hand, and the women who came up the lane in the morning came up to see her, and the small holders who sent word through Tom Riley, or through the boy, or through their own children sent the word, tell Miss Hart, ask Miss Hart what to do. She thought about it sometimes in the evening, when she was cleaning up the supper dishes and Clay had gone home, and the boy was in the lean-to and Asa was in the loft, and the house was quiet. She had wanted, in November, only to keep her ground. She had thought of nothing else. She had not asked to keep anyone else's. She had not asked to be the woman whose name was written on a piece of paper inside Annabelle's coat. But the ground had widened under her without her noticing, and there was no way to give it back now without admitting she had ever held it, and that she would not do. The 3rd week of March came in with a long, warm rain that knocked the last of the snow off the north slopes and put a green tinge on the south-facing pastures almost overnight, the way it does in Kansas when the season turns. The cottonwoods along Evelyn's south fence put on a hard fringe of green at the top branches. And one morning she woke up to the sound of meadowlarks calling from 4 directions at once, and the heifer Anna was outside the lean-to in the yard, on her own 4 legs eating new grass. And Patience the cow was watching her with the patient, bored eye of a mother whose work had been done. She stood on the porch in her nightdress with the shawl thrown over her shoulders, and the sun was coming up red and clean over the prairie east of the house, and the wind for once was warm, and she put her hands flat on the porch rail, and she breathed in deep, and she thought, we are going to come through this winter. She did not know yet, standing there with the sun on her face, that Silas Grady, in a hotel room in Bellwether, was at that moment writing a letter to a man in Chicago whose name was on a list inside Pendergast's leather case, and that the letter was an offer to sell out everything Grady knew about the syndicate in exchange for one favor, and that the favor he was asking for was a single man, sent quietly, to do one quiet thing in Cimarron County before the end of April. She did not know it. The meadowlarks did not know it. The heifer in the yard did not know it. But the long warm rain came again that night and washed the last of the winter out of the ground. And somewhere east of Chicago, a man with very pale hands packed a small leather satchel and put on a coat that was not quite the right cut for the country he was going to, and bought a ticket west. The man with the very pale hands stepped off the eastbound train at Bellwether on the afternoon of the 2nd of April, and within an hour he had walked himself into a piece of bad luck that he was, in the way of his profession, not yet aware of. His name on the hotel register was Mr. Edwin Pell. He gave his occupation as land assessor. He took a room on the 2nd floor, 2 doors down from Silas Grady's, and he did not speak to Grady that night or the next morning, because the man with pale hands did his business carefully, and his business was not the kind one conducted in hotel hallways. What he did not know was that the man across the hall from Grady, the one Clay Mercer had put there in February, was still there. His name was Otis Wend. He was a thin, sour-faced ranch hand with a quiet way of standing in doorways, and he had been watching Grady's door for 9 weeks, and had become, in that time, a fixture in the hotel that nobody noticed anymore. He had also become friendly with the night clerk, a young man named Bobby who liked whiskey and disliked Grady, and Bobby had taken to slipping a note under Otis's door every evening with the names of any new guests who had taken rooms on Grady's floor. That night Bobby's note had the name Edwin Pell on it, and the room number, and one underlined sentence. His hands are too clean for a land assessor. Otis read the note twice. Then he put on his hat and walked downstairs and out the back of the hotel, and saddled his horse, and rode at a steady working trot through the soft April night the 4 miles to Clay Mercer's place, and woke Clay up at 1 in the morning,
and told him what he had seen. Clay sat up in bed. He listened. He did not ask any questions until Otis was done.
You said his hands were too clean. That's what Bobby said. Bobby's hands are not clean. Bobby knows about hands. Did you see him? I went down to the dining room when he came in for supper. I sat 2 tables away. He had soup. He ate it with the wrong spoon. He is not from this country. All right. He took a small bag up to his room. Leather. Not a saddlebag. Not a carpet bag. A small flat case with a buckle on it. All right. Clay got out of bed. He pulled on his trousers. He pulled on his shirt and his boots. He went into the kitchen and lit the lamp and put the coffee on and stood at the stove with his hands flat on the iron until it began to warm under his palms. Otis came in and stood by the door. Otis? Yes. You go back, right now. You go in the front door of the hotel and you tell Bobby to put you in the room across the hall from Mr. Pell. You tell Bobby it's worth $10 to him. You watch that door. If Mr. Pell leaves the hotel before sunup, you follow him. If he leaves after sunup, you let me know by Tom Riley, who is going to be in the livery from 6 o'clock on. Are we clear? We are clear. And Otis? Yes. If he is going north out of town, you ride hard to Petrov's place. If he is going east, you ride to the Bell place. If he is going up the lane to Miss Hart's place, you do not ride. You shoot. Do you understand me? I understand you. Go. Otis went. Clay sat at the kitchen table with the coffee in front of him, and he looked at the lamp, and he did not move for a long time. Then he got up. He saddled the bay. He woke Asa Bright, who was sleeping in the bunkhouse, and he told Asa what was happening, and he told Asa to wake 5 other men and have them at the Hart place by dawn, mounted, armed, fed. Asa nodded once and went. Clay rode out before the moon set. He came up Evelyn's lane in the gray hour before sunrise, and the boy Hutch was already up, splitting kindling by the lantern in the yard, and Hutch saw him coming and put down the axe without being told and went to wake Evelyn, who was already up because she had been up since 3 with the heifer, who had a small lameness in the left front and would need watching. She came out on the porch with the lamp in her hand. She had on a work dress and her hair was down. She saw Clay's face and she set the lamp on the porch rail. Tell me. He told her. She listened without moving. When he was done, she nodded once, the same way Asa had nodded when he was told. All right. Evelyn. What? I want you in the house today. No. Evelyn. Clay. No. If a man has come up out of Chicago with a clean pair of hands and a small leather case, he has come for me. If he has come for me, he is not going to find me hiding in my own kitchen. We have been through this once. We are not going through it again. He is not Grady. He is not going to come up the lane in daylight. Then he will come up the lane in the dark, or he will not come up the lane at all, and he will wait for me in the brush. Either way, I am not going to be in the kitchen. I am going to be where you can see me. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. Then you are going to be on the porch where I can see you. You are going to have the Winchester. The boy and I and Asa and 3 other men are going to be in the barn, and in the brush along the lane and in the cottonwoods on the south end, and a man named Hewitt, who I trust is going to be on the roof of the lean-to. We are going to let him come in. We are not going to let him go out. Are we clear? We are clear. And Evelyn? Yes. If you have to use it, do not hesitate. Do not call out. Do not give him a chance. A man like this gives no chances and is owed none. I know. All right. By 8 in the morning, his men were in place. By 9, the day had turned into one of those false warm April mornings that smelled of mud and new grass, and the meadowlarks were going at it in the south pasture as if nothing were the matter. And Patience the cow was lying in the sun by the lean-to, and the heifer Anna was lying next to her. And a person riding up the lane would have seen one woman on a porch shelling peas into a tin bowl, and a slow boy splitting wood in the yard, and nothing else. And that person would have thought, yes, this is the place, and this is the hour. Mr. Pell came up the lane at 20 minutes past 10. He came on foot, leading a small bay horse. He had walked, it turned out, the last half-mile from where he had tied the horse out of sight of the road, in a stand of new willow along the creek. He was a small man in a coat too long for the country and a town hat. His pale hands were down at his sides. The small leather case was strapped to the horse's saddle. Evelyn saw him at this bend of the lane.
She did not stop shelling peas. She heard the boy Hutch, who was 20 feet from her, stop the axe in midair and start it again, the way Asa had told him to, because a man who stops working when a stranger appears tells the stranger a great deal. Mr. Pell came to the gate. He stopped. He took his hat off. "Good morning, ma'am." "Good morning. I wonder if I might trouble you. I've lost my way. I was looking for the Petrov place." "Petrov's is 3 miles east. You took the wrong fork at the Burnt Oak." "Ah, I see. Thank you. I wonder, might I trouble you for a cup of water before I turn back? It has been a long walk." "There is the trough at the barn. Help your horse first." Of course, of course." He opened the gate. He led the horse through. He latched the gate behind him in a way that did not match the way men in this country latched gates, because he had learned the motion from a book or from a single demonstration in Chicago. He led the horse to the trough. He let it drink. He looked around the yard with the careful blankness of a man who was making a map of it in his head. Evelyn went on shelling peas. Her hand was steady. The Winchester was leaned against the porch rail behind her where her shoulder hit it. "Ma'am, a cup of water for me too, if you'd be so kind." "On the porch. The dipper is on the bucket." He came up the porch steps. He came up easy, no hurry, the way a man comes up steps when he has all the time in the world. He picked up the dipper. He filled it from the bucket. He drank. He set the dipper down. He turned. He looked at her with the dead small eyes of a man whose business was about to begin. His right hand started to move toward the inside of his coat. The boy, Hutch, shot him. It was not a clean shot. It was a frightened shot, fired from 20 feet by a 19-year-old who had never shot a man in his life and had been told by Clay Mercer at sunup that if Mr. Pell so much as twitched on the porch, he was to fire and not stop firing until the man was on the ground. Hutch fired once. The bullet took Mr. Pell in the right shoulder and spun him a quarter turn and dropped him onto the porch boards. The leather case under his arm did not come out of his coat. The small 2-shot Derringer that had been clipped behind his lapel did not come out either, although Hewitt, the man on the lean-to roof, came down later and dug it out with the point of a knife and laid it on the kitchen table with the kind of cold satisfaction that men in his line of work do not often allow themselves. Mr. Pell did not die. Asa Bright tied his shoulder up with strips of a clean dish towel from Evelyn's kitchen, and Clay sent the boy to ride for the sheriff in Bellwether. And by 2 o'clock that afternoon, Mr. Pell was on his way to the county jail in the back of a wagon with 2 deputies riding alongside, and the small Derringer and the small leather case were in the sheriff's saddlebag. What was in the case was a piece of paper. It was a contract for the sale of the Hart homestead, signed at the bottom with the name Evelyn Hart, in a hand that was not Evelyn Hart's, witnessed by the names of 2 men who did not exist, dated the 3rd of April, the day after Mr. Pell would have done his work. The man with the pale hands had not come to steal the place by force. He had come to make her death look like an accident, and then to file the forged contract, and then to disappear back to Chicago on the next eastbound train, and the syndicate would have moved on the deed before the body in the brush was found. Pendergast laid the paper out on Evelyn's kitchen table that evening, and they all looked at it in silence, and Evelyn did not touch it, and Clay did not touch it, and the boy Hutch, who was sitting in the corner by the stove still shaking faintly in the way a man shakes after his first day of being a man, did not look at it at all. "This goes to district court tomorrow morning," Pendergast said. "With the man and the gun and the contract, the syndicate is done in this state. Done. The names on the list go to the federal marshal in Topeka by Friday. Grady will be in custody by Monday. I will stake my license on it." "And after that," Clay said, "after that there will be a long, quiet trial, and Grady will go to a federal prison for a long time, and the syndicate will lose everything they put into this county and a great deal of what they put into the territory before, and the smallholders in Cimarron will hold their ground." Evelyn finally spoke. She had not said anything since the wagon had left with Mr. Pell in it. "The boy." "Ma'am," said Pendergast. "The boy fired a gun at a man on my porch this morning. There is going to be a question about it." "No, ma'am. The man came up your steps with a concealed weapon and a forged contract bearing your name. The boy fired on a wounded snake. There will be no question." "There will be in the boy's head." Pendergast was silent. Clay was silent. After a moment, Evelyn got up and went to the corner by the stove and sat down on a low stool next to Hutch. She did not look at him. She picked up the kitchen towel from the rail and folded it into a square and laid it on her knee.
Hutch. Ma'am. That man would have killed me. I know it, ma'am. You did what was right. Yes, ma'am. You will think about it for the rest of your life. That is the price of having done it. I want you to know that price in advance because nobody told me the first time I had to do a hard thing, and I would have done it better if somebody had. Yes, ma'am. Look at me, Hutch. He looked. His eyes were wet. They did not run because he had a kind of dignity about them, the same dignity he had walked with the morning he had gone for help. You will carry this until the day you die. There is no help for that, but you carried it for me, and that means I will carry it with you for the rest of mine. That is not a small thing. Are we clear? We are clear, ma'am. All right. She got up. She went back to the table. The trial of Silas Grady took place in the second week of May, in the district courthouse in Topeka, and lasted 4 days. Pendergast did not try the case himself, but he sat behind the prosecutor every day and passed notes up to the table. Evelyn testified on the second day. She wore the only dark dress she owned, which had been her mother's. She told what had happened, in order, beginning with the buggy in November and ending with the porch in April. She did not embellish. She did not weep. She answered the defense lawyer's questions with the same flat clarity with which she had answered Clay Mercer's in her kitchen the first morning. Grady was convicted on 6 counts. He went to a federal penitentiary in Leavenworth. The 6 other names on Pendergast's list were indicted within the month. 2 of them fled the country. 2 pleaded out. 2 stood trial in the fall and were convicted. The land syndicate that had drawn the map of the spur line was dissolved by court order by the 1st of November. The spur line was eventually built, 4 years later, by a different company, along a different route that did not displace a single smallholder, because by then the smallholders of Cimarron County had become organized in a way that no railroad in Kansas would casually cross again. The new railroad company paid market value for the easements it needed. It paid in cash. It paid on time. The check that came to Evelyn Hart for the easement across the southeast corner of her property was for $1,400, and she split it down the middle and gave half of it back to the smallholders of the county in the form of zero-interest loans against future calf crops, the way she had loaned Annabelle $60 in March of the year of the bad winter. By then, however, the homestead behind the dead cottonwoods was no longer a single homestead. By then it was something else, with a new name. That part of it happened in June of the year of the bad winter, the year of Grady, the year of the man with the pale hands. It happened on an afternoon when the wind had finally laid down for good and the prairie south of the house had gone the color of new green coins. Patience the cow was in foal again. The heifer Anna was knee-high to a man, and the boy Hutch had taught her to come when he whistled. The cottonwoods that had been dead in January had not, it turned out, been dead. 3 of them had put on new leaf in May. The other 2 had not, and Tom Riley had cut them down for firewood and used the stumps to make corner posts for a new gate at the south fence, a gate that hung straight and latched right. Clay rode up the lane that afternoon in his good coat. Evelyn saw him coming from the kitchen window. She knew, before he was halfway up the lane, what he had ridden up to say. She put the kettle on, she wiped her hands on her apron. She went out on the porch and waited. He stopped at the foot of the steps. He took his hat off. Evelyn, Clay, may I come up? You may come up. He came up. He did not sit. She did not sit. They stood at the porch rail and they looked out across the south pasture toward the creek, where the chestnut mare and the bay gelding and the old gelding mister were grazing together in a loose group, and the heifer Anna was lying in the sun with her chin on her own knee. I have come to ask you a thing. All right. And before I ask it, I want to say a thing so that you will hear the asking right. All right. I have been a man with a great deal of land for a long time. The land has made me powerful in this county in a way that I have, in truth, never wanted. I have run a good outfit, and I have treated my men well, and I have not, as far as I know, taken anything that was not mine. But I have been alone in a large house for 16 years, and the largeness has been the loudest thing in my life. I did not know that until I started coming up this lane. I know it now. She nodded once. I'm not going to ask you to marry me, Evelyn, not the way it is usually asked. I'm not going to ask you to be my wife in the way the law and the county and the men in the county would understand the word. I'm going to ask you something different, and I am going to lay out what I mean by it,
And if it is not to your liking, we will go back to the partnership we had in March, and we will speak no more of it. And I will still ride up this lane on Sundays, and you will still cook better than I do, and we will be friends until one of us is in the ground. Go on. I want to put my outfit together with yours. I want to file a joint operation at the county seat. Mercer Hart. Not Mercer alone. Not Hart Mercer. Mercer Hart, because that is the order in which we came to it. I want you to keep every acre of your land in your name, on your deed, with no transfer of any kind to me. I want to put half of my land in your name, on your deed, as your free property to do with as you will. I want to write a partnership document that gives you full equal say in every decision that touches either spread. I want to live in this house, not mine. I want to keep my house as the bunkhouse for the joint outfit, because it is larger and better for men, and this is a house for a family, which is what I want this to be. She did not answer for a moment. Clay. Yes. You are asking me to be your equal. I am asking you to be my equal, not my wife. My equal. If the word wife is on the paper, it is on the paper because the law requires it to be, not because it describes anything between us that is not already there. The word wife in this county means a woman who has given up her name and her ground. I am asking you for the opposite. I am asking you to keep your name and your ground and to add mine to it on terms that you set. Why? Because I am 43 years old and I have been alive a long time, and I have learned one thing for certain, which is that the things a man builds alone do not last. They go to a stranger when he dies. They are taken apart by his heirs. They become a story other people tell. The only thing that lasts is the thing two people build together, where each of them has a hand on it and each of them is named on the door. I would like, before I am too old to lift a post, to build one thing that lasts. Clay? Yes. You are not going to be too old to lift a post for 20 years. Then we have 20 years to build it. She laughed. It came out small and surprised, the way her laugh always came out when he made her laugh, and she put her hand on the porch rail next to his, not touching, but close. There is a thing I have to say back, she said. Will you let me say it? I will. I do not love easily. I loved my husband and he died, and I loved my father and he died, and I loved a child I never got to name and she died, and for 3 years after that I did not love anybody, and I built a fence around my heart that was higher than the one around this property and harder to climb. You have been climbing it since November. You have not done it by trying. You have done it by being here every day and asking nothing and waiting for me to come down to the gate on my own. That is how I have come to it. That is the only way I could have come to it. If you had asked in February or in March, I would have said no. Not because I did not feel it, but because I was not ready to know I felt it. I am ready now. Evelyn, I am not done. All right. I will say yes to the partnership. I will say yes to the joint operation. I will say yes to my name on half of your land, although I will tell you now that the half you give me I will hold in trust for the small holders of this county, to be sold to them at $5 an acre under market when the time is right, because the land in this county should be held by the people who work it and not by you and not by me. Are we agreed? We are agreed. And I will say yes to the word wife, because you are right that the law requires it, and because I find, against all the expectation I had of myself, that I would like to be married to you. I would like it badly. I have been lonely too. I have been lonely in a different way from you, but I have been lonely, and I have not known it either until you started coming up the lane. Evelyn. Yes. May I? You may. He put his arms around her, and she put hers around him, and they stood that way on the porch for a long time, in the warm June afternoon, with the wind finally laid down and the meadowlarks going on in the south pasture. And somewhere out beyond the cottonwoods, a crow called 3 notes, falling the way the crows had always called in that country and would always call. The papers were signed at the county seat on the 4th of July. The joint operation took its name. The neighbors came for a long supper on the lawn of the Hart place. Annabelle came. Frank Bell came, sitting up the whole evening, the spring having brought him back as Evelyn had said it would. Petrov came with his wife and 3 sons. Tom Riley came with his wife and his 2 daughters, the younger one of whom, Lila, sat next to Evelyn at the table and read aloud from a primer she had brought, in a clear, careful voice that did not stumble once. And Evelyn listened with her hand on the back of the girl's neck. A thing has to be said here, at the end, that the story has been pointing at all along without ever putting it down in plain words. A piece of land does not get saved by a single act of courage at a gate. A piece of land gets saved by 1,000 small, unromantic acts performed over a long, bad season by people who do not know whether the season will end. It gets saved by sweeping the yard when the yard is the only thing you still own. It gets saved by lending $60 to a stranger whose hand is shaking. It gets saved by a slow-witted boy with a steady aim and a clear conscience. It gets saved by a young lawyer with spectacles and a widowed mother. It gets saved by a deputy clerk who decides he is tired of signing his name to lies. It gets saved by a man who has 1,000 head and decides against every habit of his class to put his name beside a woman's instead of on top of hers. What Clay Mercer learned that year, which he had not known in November, was that the largest thing a powerful man can do is to use his power to make somebody else's name larger. What Evelyn Hart learned, which she had not known either, was that the high fence she had built around her heart was not protecting anything that needed protecting, and that letting one careful man climb it did not make her smaller. It made her larger. It made her, in a way she would not have believed possible a year before, herself. The Mercer Hart Ranch became one of the most respected properties in the territory, in the way of such things, although Evelyn never cared about the respect, and Clay never cared about the territory. What they cared about was the kitchen and the south fence and the heifer Anna, who grew up to be a fine cow, and the boy Hutch, who married a girl from Petrov's family and ran the home barn for 40 years, and Tom Riley's daughter Lila, who went to college in Lawrence and came back to teach the school in town for a generation, and the meadowlarks in the south pasture, who came back every spring, and the cottonwoods, which had not been dead after all, only sleeping, and which lived on long after the people who had stood at the broken fence in the bad winter were gone, and rattled their leaves in the wind, and bore witness to whatever came after. And the small leather book in the kitchen drawer, with the names of every neighbor who had come up the lane, and what they owed, and what they had paid back, and what they had brought instead of money, was never closed. It just kept going, in Evelyn's hand at first, and then in Lila's, and then in the hand of a girl whose name has not yet been spoken in this story, who would not be born for another 20 years, and who would not need to be, because the book was the kind of book that did not need a single hand to keep it open. It only needed a kitchen and a door, and a woman who knew how to plant a garden in January. That, in the end, was all it had ever needed.